Do you need a pep talk?
I need a pep talk like 24/7. Someone to follow me around and tell me fun movies to watch and recommend small businesses to support.
You just described the Total SF podcast. Bay Area culture, fun guests, cable car bell ringing.
We're your pandemic support group led by the Chronicles' Peter Hartlaub and Heather Knight. New episode every Friday morning.
Subscribe to Total SF wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to Warriors Off Court, the San Francisco Chronicles NBA podcast. I'm your host, Connor Letourneau, and today I'm joined by Chronicles sports writer Rusty Simmons. During our conversation, we broke down the Warriors' decision to take Jonathan Kuminga number 7 and Moses Moody number 14 in Thursday's NBA draft. Rusty, we're here in the bowels of Chase Center. Of course, bowels makes it sound like we're in some dark, damp room. We're actually in a really nice luxury suite in Chase Center. The draft is still ongoing. I believe they're in the latter stages of the first round, but the Warriors' night, big trade aside, potential trade aside, is over. The Warriors took Jonathan Kuminga, number 7 from G League Ignite, and Moses Moody out of Arkansas, number 14. With their 2 lottery picks. They kept both picks. There was a lot of speculation that they would try to package those in a trade. They kept them, took a big upside play in Kuminga at 7, and then more of a ready-made guy, Moses Moody, but someone who also still has a bit of upside. He's 19 years old. What was your reaction when you saw the Warriors go with Kuminga at 7? Because there had been a lot of speculation about that possibility. You know, everyone was saying in recent days, Kuminga could fall. What will the Warriors do? To me, that was the most interesting thing entering the draft was if Kuminga's available, which wasn't a guarantee. If he was available, what do they do? Because it was the ultimate, like, do you just totally ignore your win now mantra because he's not close to being helpful next season? Or do you just go big and go home or go home?
It's fascinating, even the way it played out this year, because you're exactly right. This is a top 5 talent that falls to him at 7, but he's probably not going to help you this year, if much at all. And the Warriors stars had just told the front office, hey, we got 2 or 3 years left. Let's go after this thing. So that's fascinating in itself. It's more fascinating to me because they had the 14 pick. So I think they had an option. They could say, okay, we can do a big upside thing here and then get a help now player at 14. So that's what made it even more interesting to me is that they had so many options. And I think they came away with the perfect world. They got an upside guy for the future to help with the transition from the 3 stars. And they got a guy in Moody who I think can help this year, who can play reliable minutes in the rotation. And
you know, Moody can help this year, but there was a lot of talk entering the draft about them going after someone like Chris Duarte at 14. And I liked Duarte. I thought he was definitely a plug-and-play type guy, but he's 24 years old. Right. And you have someone in Moody who just turned 19, I think projects. I see him kind of as like a Danny Green type in the NBA. Best case scenario, which is a very good role player for a winning team. So if you could have someone like that, that's a huge asset. And so I like the mix with him of the upside and the ability to help now. He was a real possibility at 7 not that long ago. I didn't love him at 7 because I don't know if he has that level of upside. If I'm taking someone in the top 10, I want them to at least have a chance to be a stud, to be, you know, an all-star guy. I'm not saying you have to be, but I want to at least have that ceiling. He doesn't have that. He's not an elite athlete. His mobility is not amazing. But I think he can be a good rotational wing, and that's honestly enough. Yeah. But the really interesting pick to me was Kuminga, because especially not just the fact that they took Kuminga, but how the draft unfolded and the fact that they still took Kuminga. Because, you know, it seemed like entering the draft there was a pretty set top 5. and everyone knew who was going to go top 5. We all thought we knew the order. The Raptors ended up surprising us, taking Scotty Barnes 4, which left Orlando to take Jalen Suggs at 5. But the big inflection point was going to be 6 with Oklahoma City. And a lot of people thought Oklahoma City, which was in total rebuild mode, would bet on the upside of Kuminga and, be in a position to give him minutes and just watch him grow. Instead, they bet on the upside of Josh Giddey, who's a guy who I had been hearing in recent days was emerging as a real possibility for the Warriors at 7. They really liked him, and there's a decent chance that they could have taken him at 7 if he had been available. So, he's off the board. So when the Warriors go on the clock at 7, the top possibilities, the real possibilities for them there are Jonathan Kuminga, James Bouknight out of Connecticut, and last but certainly not least, Franz Wagner, who has gained a lot of steam as a possibility in recent days for them at 7. Of those 3, I think Franz would have been the most ready-made. He's kind of the perfect fit for the Warriors system. Super versatile, long, deceivingly athletic, has all the intangibles to be like a really helpful long-term piece. As more of a complimentary guy, maybe his upside isn't there, but he would be really helpful. Bouknight has a chance to be a high-level scorer in the NBA, could offer a real offensive punch off the bench, kind of maybe form a nice 1-2 punch long-term with Jordan Poole off that bench. And then you have Kuminga, who is probably the most physically gifted player in this draft in terms of his wingspan, his frame, all of those things. Has a ton of upside, especially offensively. Defensively, he has all the tools to be great. He just hasn't proven it yet. But in terms of the near term, he's a really bad fit for the Warriors. He's a ball stopper. He's a guy who has not proven he can play off the ball at all. He has not shown a great feel for the game. He doesn't play with a high motor all the time. His consistency is lacking when it comes to defense. He's got some problems with his shot that need to be worked out. I mean, those are all the antithesis of what the Warriors normally look for. The Warriors normally look for, guys who can move off the ball, guys who have a strong feel for the game, all these things. And the Warriors just went against their entire MO because they believe, I'm guessing, because they believe in this guy's upside.
Right. Yeah, and of those weaknesses that you brought up, the motor to me is the hardest one to swallow. With his background, he was watching NBA highlights in internet cafes in the Congo. He was playing with beat up sneakers on dirt basketball courts. He's not going to have a feel for the game. I think that's something that he can learn, especially in the Warriors system. He's going to have to learn those things. But the motor bothers me in the bubble to hear so many talent evaluators say he was lackadaisical on defense or didn't get after it on every play. That bothers me. I wonder, it'll be interesting talking to him. He was injured at the end of that thing. I wonder if he was injured throughout the entire thing. There might be more to it than we know right now. But you're exactly right. You said it right. It's so out of character for the Warriors to go after somebody like that. But it probably speaks to the sheer talent that there is there, that they couldn't pass it up. When you first got to the arena today, you said, if he falls to 7, do you take him? And unequivocally, I said, yeah, you have to. You have to. It's the pick they had to make.
Yeah. I mean, this is, in terms of his upside, he's a number 1 overall pick caliber guy. There's a reason why there was legitimate buzz for him going number 1 about 7 months ago. He started, I watched the bubble pretty closely. Anyone who listens to this podcast, reads me on a regular basis, knows that I'm probably, of any traveling NBA beat writer in the country, I'm probably most into the G League. And so I watched a lot of G League Ignites games, and his first 3 games, he looked like a generational talent. I mean, he looked unbelievable. I mean, the stuff he was doing. I remember one play where I think it was against Santa Cruz in the first game of the G League bubble, where he just like drove down to the key and lifted off from right outside like the elbow and just threw down this one-handed dunk, and everyone was just like, what the hell? Like, what was that? I mean, he just came out of nowhere, and he has those flashes. But the concerning thing was that he seemed to get worse as the bubble went on. And I know some people who work for G League Ignite pretty closely, and I talked to them throughout the process and since then. And what I heard was that he had a hard time dealing with Jalen Green kind of taking over and his star rising. And I think there were some internal things there. And I think his confidence kind of waned and he kind of got in his own head a little bit. And then he ended up shutting down early, which was a little bit of a red flag for front offices. You know, like, does this guy not love the game? From what I heard there, he just got advice from his agent and took advice. It might have been bad advice, but that was the advice he got. But you talked about, you know, growing up in the Congo, you know, not having the structure of American basketball to benefit from. On top of that, like, just a little bit of background on Jonathan Kuminga. He's from Goma, Congo, which is one of the poorest countries in the entire world. You know, they don't have a lot of, you know, hardwood courts out there. He grew up playing on the streets, you know, watched the NBA, going to internet cafes. You know, he was actually discovered at a basketball camp at age 12 by Bismack Biyombo, who is also Congolese and was playing for Charlotte Hornets at that time. Ended up moving stateside at 13 years old, has not been back to the Congo since he was 13 years old, has a brother out here who played college ball who's now kind of his manager. He actually left Texas Tech mid-season to help his brother, knowing his brother was going to enter the draft. And so he's had a really unique story, and he's been away from his family for half a decade. And, you know, so you can't really question his commitment level. But, you know, he spent 3 years in high school. Only 3 because he reclassified and turned pro and joined G League Ignite a year early. But during those 3 years of high school, he bounced between 3 different high schools. He went to school in West Virginia, one in New Jersey, one in New York. So he never had like a cohesive system. He never had like a framework to build upon because he was constantly bouncing around. So I think that explains some of why he is so raw. Yeah. But he was the top rated player in his high school class nationally because despite some of the rawness, he was so far along physically. And, you know, you look at what he was able to do at the beginning of that G League bubble, and I mean, there's a lot of like Victor Oladipo in his game. There's a lot of that just downhill stud. And I want to believe that he can tap into that and that he can be one of the greatest players to come out of this draft. Now, do you want your top 10 pick playing in the G League as a rookie? Not necessarily, but this is a unique situation, and I think it was the right move. I really do. We'll have more of my conversation with Rusty Simmons right after the break.
Hello, Heather Knight. If you had to pick one thing we argue about the most on the Total SF podcast, what would...
Star Trek 4. Spaceships and whales. It's unwatchable, Peter Hartlaub.
But that's pretty much it. When we're not fighting about the greatest movie in San Francisco history, Total SF is Good Vibes, your pandemic support group.
We interview fun guests, give tips to explore San Francisco.
Anti-anxiety medication as a podcast. New episode every Friday morning.
Subscribe to Total SF wherever you listen to podcasts.
It was interesting that when you were talking about some of the insight that you got from the people that you know with the Ignite, saying that as Jalen Green's star started to rise, that maybe Kuminga had trouble with that, and immediately it triggered what you just said last. Well, if he's spending a bunch of time in Santa Cruz this next year, how's he going to handle that? I think it'll probably be better because they do shuttle Warriors coaches down there, and it's a very cohesive franchise, the two. So I think he'll be okay with it. And it'll be the first time where he's ever in one place for long enough to get a system, to understand a system. And that's the only way he's going to get minutes. So I think it's the right move. But that'll be an interesting thing to monitor all year is how he does handle that, because he's probably going to be the highest pick that spends the most amount of time in the G League.
Yeah, and, he had a pretty brief media availability after getting drafted, but in that brief media availability, he said he wants to be a Hall of Famer, and he said that he's going to go from the bottom to the top in the next couple months. Yep. Basically saying, like, I'm going to be Rookie of the Year. Yeah. Like, I know people are down on me right now, but I'm going to prove them wrong this year, which, there is a small part of me that thinks that maybe he can help this next season, just because physically he's ready in those things. But we were talking before we started recording, and you said if he's playing next season meaningful minutes, that doesn't bode well for the Warriors, which I can understand that. I guess maybe it's just like the curiosity in me just would like to see how he handles that type of situation. But yeah, the Warriors need to learn from the James Wiseman situation. I think they need to take all the pressure off him from the get-go. Just be like, yo, this guy is a ball of clay. We're going to bring him along slowly. But I actually think that he has more upside than James Wiseman. I think he, right away, is their most interesting young player. And I honestly think, like, we talk a lot about this win now mode and the need to capitalize and maximize Steph Curry's prime, and all that's true, but you do have to think a little bit about the future, and you do have to think about who's going to kind of lead you into that next era. And in terms of guys who are currently on the roster, I don't think they have that guy. Like, Wiseman could be a really good center in the league. I don't think he's that guy. I don't think that Jordan Poole is that guy. Jordan Poole, I think, is going to be a really good rotation player for a long time, which is a coup at 28, but I don't think he's, a face of a franchise. I think Kuminga has legitimate face of the franchise potential. And, people talk about his floor. I do think that he's going to at least be a good player in the NBA. Yep. Like, I don't think this guy is going to be a complete bust by any possibility. I think, but I kind of give Bob Myers credit because I think that the easy thing in some ways would have been to just take Franz Wagner. Right. Who would have been, in my opinion, like a boring pick, but maybe the right pick. But at the same time, just I'm so like, I'm gonna take a nap. Like, let me know when I should wake up type situation, because he doesn't have the upside. He would be a safe pick, I think. Kuminga is a risk, but it's a warranted risk. And if you look at the Warriors roster, I know that they need some help, but I don't think that the chances of them being a contender next season is going to hinge on who they took today. I think, the truth is that rookies usually aren't great, and, even guys taken in the top 10 are not necessarily going to put you over the top, especially when you already have players like Steph and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. Like, this isn't a normal situation for a top pick to come into. So I loved the guts. I loved the gamble. And honestly, at the end of the day, all we really care about is storylines and the journalistic aspect of it. And I'm so intrigued by Kuminga, and I'm very excited to chronicle his journey over the next year or so, because I think it's going to be fascinating. I'm already booking my ticket to Santa Cruz on a regular basis. And
I thought you were going to say to Goma.
One thing to speak about Goma, like, one thing that people don't know about Jonathan Kuminga, he's from Goma, which is, I believe, is the capital of the Congo. A couple months ago, Goma was ravaged by a volcano. I read up on my world news, and it was all over the New York Times. There's an active volcano right at the foot of the city, and it erupted a couple months ago, and the entire city, over 1 million people, had to evacuate. And a lot of his friends and family were among those refugees. And so he has family and friends who are at like refugee camps right now. Really. And so, if you question this guy, like, this guy's got a lot to him. So I'm excited to kind of start peeling back the layers a little bit.
The other thing that triggered in my head while you were talking about that was the safe picks, the Wagners of the world, or if Duarte had fallen to him at 14. I'm not sure those are necessarily tradable assets. Kuminga is. Wiseman is. So even if they don't necessarily develop here or work with the Warriors championship window with Curry, Green, and Thompson, they now have some pieces that they can move where teams aren't just coming to them and saying, you have nothing but picks. That's not enough. Now they have real assets that teams are going to covet. So if you do get to the trade deadline, well, you're right. Kuminga's probably not going to help this year. Rookies usually don't. He could help at the trade deadline when another superstar comes available and the Warriors have Kuminga now, Wiseman now, and future picks, and Poole, and all these guys that other teams actually want.
Yeah, and that's been the narrative, and I know that that's been a big thing people are talking about is, did they take him for his trade value? I know that they had been in talks earlier tonight about potential trades involving Kuminga, and nothing happened, and from what I've heard, nothing is imminent. It could be a situation where something materializes, comes together in the next few weeks, and he's traded as a part of a bigger deal. But I honestly question his trade value. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why he was still there at 7. There's a reason why, and if the Warriors hadn't taken him at 7, he could have very well fallen to 10, 11. I mean, there was just so many questions about his how much of a project he is, and his defensive issues, and his shooting inefficiency, and all that, and so I really wonder, like, who sees him as the answer and is willing to, make him a key part of a trade for an important player. Like, I don't know if that really is out there. I think the Warriors probably took him thinking maybe there is a team out there that loves this guy, but probably my guess is that they're comfortable just holding on to him. And the thing is, if there was going to be a trade for him, it would need to happen soon. It would need to happen in the next month or two before the season starts, because you get into the season, he's not going to be playing, and he's going to honestly be probably one of the only lottery picks he's not playing. He's probably going to be in the G League. Like, people are going to, even if he's dominant in the G League, like, people are going to sour on him just because he's not where a top 10 pick should be as a rookie. So I think there's a small window. Maybe he goes out. We got Summer League coming up here in the next couple of days. Maybe he goes to Sacramento and Vegas and is just dominant. Maybe he's just like a man among boys, and other teams are like, whoa, okay, maybe he's closer to helping than we thought. And then, maybe that's what ends up happening, and the Warriors can package him in a deal. I think they're going to do everything they can to showcase him, not only to bring along his development, but for those purposes. So it'll be fascinating. I'm going to be in Sacramento. I'm going to be in Vegas. That is the number one thing I will be watching. Moses Moody, good pick at 14, but I'm just so intrigued by Kuminga.
Yeah, and you might as well get that profile filed and in the bag, because did
I just give away too much? Yeah. Oh man, we might need to cut this. Full disclosure, I was supposed to write that weeks ago, but it fell through. So he's not on the team now, so it'll happen at some point. Rusty, thank you so much for joining me back on the podcast. You've been helping out in a bunch of different ways. You've been on the beat for a long time. Can you think of like a comparative situation since you've been around the Warriors to this? I mean, where betting this big on someone who is this raw?
No, not specifically. Just because they had so many picks that year, it reminds me a little bit of 2012, where they knew they had the pieces for a team that might, I don't even know if they were saying contending yet, but was making the playoffs and could do some things. And they held on to the 7th pick to get Harrison Barnes, and then got Festus Ezeli, who was able to play right away, and then lucked out on Draymond Green. So it reminds me a little bit of that, just that they had so much draft capital and were trending in the right direction. Now they have more proven players, and they're trying to fill in some pieces on that. That's the only thing that comes to mind right away. But never going this high on upside when there's already a team that has championship mindset.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like the entire narrative for a long time was they're going to go in on the win now thing and maximize Steph's prime. And honestly, even though Moses Moody can help them, it still kind of contradicts that because he is 19 years old. He wouldn't help them as much as, some other guys they could have gotten there. But I think that with Moody, they were just so happy that he was still there.
I didn't think he'd get past San Antonio, so I was shocked on that one. I thought he was a good fit there. So if I'm the Warriors and I'm looking at this, I'm thinking they got potentially a top 1 or 2 player if Kuminga works. They got 1 or 2 to drop to 7, and then they got Moody, who I think was a top 10 player and gets past San Antonio, which you never want to be drafted behind San Antonio. So to me, this was a perfect world for the Warriors today. Now,
yeah. So what would you grade this draft for the Warriors?
I'll tell you this, and I'll give a shout out to Bram, who runs another really popular podcast. He texted me this morning and said, "What do you think will happen tonight?" And I said, "A perfect world will be Kuminga and Moody." And I had no thought that would actually happen. I thought Moody was going 12.
Wow. So you'll give him an A.
That's an A+, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm gonna give them a B+, and the only reason I'm not giving them an A is because I would have liked to have seen them orchestrate a trade where they could have gotten someone who has already been in the NBA and can like slide in right away. But as far as the scenario of keeping both picks, I think this is a best case scenario. I know there are going to be a lot of Warriors fans, a lot of people out there who aren't loving it because they're going to have to not see their top 10 pick playing in the NBA next season. But hey, I have a feeling that Santa Cruz is going to be selling out every single game that he's playing in because he's going to be fun to watch. And the thing is with young guys, like, if you see glimpses, if you see flashes, like you gotta seize on that because once you can focus on his shortcomings all you want, but his highs were higher than almost any player in this draft's highs. Yep. And you gotta believe that with being able to focus on it full time and being in an NBA environment, that he's going to have more and more of those highs. The guy's only 18 years old. He could have been a high school senior this past year. I mean, yeah, you can be critical of his season in the G League, but he averaged almost 16 points per game, over 7. He's a really good rebounder, by the way. Over 7 rebounds per game and a little over 30 minutes per game against grown men.
Right.
I mean, that alone is incredibly impressive. And so I do think that, like, a lot of times with the draft, there's these narratives that develop, and sometimes people can get so negative. And I think with Kuminga, it almost reminds me a little bit of, like, Andrew Wiggins when he was in Minnesota. It's like people just forgot that he was actually a good player. People are just so negative now, and they're like, oh, he's, going to be a bust, and no way the Warriors should take him at 7. I'm like, did you see the same, 3 games to start the G League that I did? Because if you go back and watch that film against Santa Cruz, and that Warriors are watching that film, he looked like a generational player. Yeah. And I have a hard time believing that was just a complete aberration. I was very surprised by his regression, but I talked to someone with the Warriors right after that game against Santa Cruz, and he said he's a number one pick. Like, he's better than Jalen Green. He's better than Jalen Green. Jalen Green in that same game looked like a little mouse. He just looked scared. He looked totally overwhelmed by the moment. Now, the fact that Jalen Green improved and Jonathan Kuminga regressed obviously bodes better for Green, and is part of why Green went number 2 and Kuminga went number 7. But I do think that Kuminga has that same level of upside. And I think, he's more raw than Green, but there's reasons that we've already talked about for why he's raw. I mean, so I think it's, I'll be honest with you, like, entering this draft, I was so curious to see if they would take Kuminga, and I really believed they wouldn't, but I really wanted them to. And the reason I really wanted them to is because I'm so curious about him. Like, I'm just so intrigued by him. I don't know if he'll be the right pick long term, but I just want to see. Yeah. And I think that there's a strong contingent in the front office, leading with these guys named the Lakebs. I think the Lakebs are big fans of Kuminga. I think they were very vocal in that draft room, being like, we talent wins out. Yep. Like, come on, guys. Yep. And I think that's why they went the way they went. We're going to be talking to Bob Myers here shortly. Hopefully we can get a little bit more insight into the thought process. My guess is we won't. I love Bob, but he doesn't really, lift the curtain that much for us.
He's not going to expand much on the Miami workout.
Yeah. But, they did. I knew that when they flew out to Miami, that they were serious about him. Mm-hmm. They took him out to dinner. They did the whole 9. I talked to someone the other day who said that Kuminga was actually at the Peach Jam, the high school tournament, a couple days ago, watching his old AAU team play. And from what I heard, one of the Warrior scouts spent the entire game talking to Kuminga's brother. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, they're really digging in deep here. They're really doing their homework, because I don't think they thought Kuminga had a chance to be there at 7 until just the past week or so. So I think they felt like they had to play catch up a lot. And I talked to someone yesterday in the front office who was like, if he's there, we're leaning toward taking him. And that made me think, okay, there's definitely a couple factions in that front office. I'm sure there are some people who are like not comfortable with it. I'm sure there was a vocal Franz Wagner contingent. But personally, I'm very happy that Kuminga won out, because it's just going to be, like I said, Santa Cruz Warriors game, sign me up. Let's go. I'm so excited to see him just obliterate some G League competition, because if he's doing that at 18, he's going to be doing it even more and more at 19.
Yeah. Well, while Connor is shuttling back and forth between Walnut Creek for Ignite games and Santa Cruz for Warriors games to see Kuminga, I'll stick around here and watch Steph and Clay and Draymond, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. I will say that's like an underrated thing about this. Kuminga doesn't even have to really move.
No.
I mean, I know he's been based out of Miami recently, but he spent all last year out in Walnut Creek, so he's familiar with the area. And as a guy who's from abroad, that helps the transition. For sure. Our thanks to Rusty Simmons for joining me on the podcast. Really appreciated all of his insight. Warriors Off Court is a production of the San Francisco Chronicle. Support Warriors Off Court in the newsroom that creates it by signing up for a Chronicle membership at sfchronicle.com/pod.